Good evening, everyone. My name is Robin Abad-Acquavillo, one of the curators and programmers here at the SF Urban Film Festival, and I am so honored to welcome you to this portion of this evening's program. We will have a performance by the Oakland-based musician and harpist Destiny Mahan, as well as others who were featured in the film. Before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the rest of the SF Urban behind the scenes. Faye Darmawi, our founder and executive producer with the festival as well. Our humanities advisor, Professor Ron Sundstrom, and our festival manager and curatorial fellow, Kristal Chelik. Also our social media manager, Hannah Moore. Before we get to Destiny's welcome performance, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement gifted to us by the American Indian Cultural District. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded, ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. We are presenting this land acknowledgement to promote the visibility of the Ramaytush Ohlone and all American Indians living and thriving today on their ancestral homelands. So with that, I will turn the stage over to Destiny Mohammed, who is going to grace us with a short musical performance on her harp.
Yesterday, there's a brighter today. On the other side of yesterday, there's a brighter today. You gotta hold on, you gotta be so strong, let the sorrow fade away. You got to hold on, gotta be so strong, let the sorrow fade away. On the other side, on the other side of yesterday, there's a brighter today. Oh, on the other side of yesterday, there's a brighter today. You've got to hold on, gotta be so strong, let the sorrow fade away. You've got to hold on, you gotta be so strong, let the sorrow fade away. On the other side, on the other side of yesterday, of yesterday, other side, on the other side of yesterday, of yesterday, on the other side of yesterday, there's a brighter today. On the other side of yesterday, there's a brighter today. On the other side, on the other side, on the other side, on the other side, on the other side.
Destiny, thank you. That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
It's a really wonderful way to kick off a program about spiritual infrastructure. Before we, I think, get into the panel, Destiny and I will be joined by some other folks. I just wanted to acknowledge with everyone that we are in this virtual setting. And so, glitches and things may happen, as indeed they have over this week. So if you have any issues, just, refresh your browser, however you're tuning in, whether that's on our festival website or YouTube or Facebook. And we also want to invite you to leave us any comments, any thoughts that you may be having, or if you have issues. If you're tuning in via our website, there's a submission form just beneath your kind of view screen there. And then if you're on YouTube and Facebook, you can also use the comment function to address comments to the panelists or express your enthusiasm, give us a thumbs up. We also love to know where everyone is viewing from. So if you are in Oakland or the East Bay, San Francisco, or elsewhere in the state or the country, we would love to know where you all are coming in from. So this session will be recorded and available later also for folks to see, so you can also share this out. We'll have about 40 minutes of panel discussion here, and then about 50 minutes to address any questions that you all might be submitting online. So before we get to the panel, just want to give a quick and a heartfelt thank you to our members. The San Francisco Urban Film Festival is a big family building affair, and there are many ways folks show up for the festival, and one of those ways is to become a member. So please consider doing so. You can sign up on our website. Also, we are an entirely volunteer-run organization. Normally our activities are, of course, funded by ticket sales. This year, of course, we're presenting all material free. And so we encourage you, if you're so moved, to become a member, give us a sustaining donation so that we can continue to bring these programs to you. All right. So now on to our panel. I would like to start by introducing Spencer Wilkinson, the filmmaker who made the Alice Street film. Welcome, Spencer. Nice to see you. Next, I'd like to introduce Desi Mundo. He's a style writer, a muralist, and the director of the Community Rejuvenation Project. Desi was in this film, as all of you know, who just came from watching that. I'd also like to introduce Lailan Sandra Huen, who is a community organizer and activist, also featured in the film.
Hey, everyone.
And hi, Lailan. And Pancho Pescador, graffiti artist and educator, also worked with Desi on the mural, the Alice Street mural. And we've all met, of course, already the wonderful and talented Destiny Muhammad. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for gracing us this evening with your presence. So I just want to open by reflecting on the theme of tonight's festival program, spiritual infrastructure. This is actually an idea coined by my friend, the installation artist Ben Davis. And our idea is that cities are made up, of course, of physical infrastructure like bridges and power transmission systems and transit systems and sewer systems. Parks and open space, but they're also comprised of another kind of infrastructure, and that is the spiritual infrastructure. What is that? Well, to me, those are all of the rituals of community belonging that we engage in, these social practices, rituals of connectivity and healing, which we'll talk about later, this evening, was very much part of what the Alice Street mural project and this film have been about. About institutions in the neighborhood, like the Malanga Center and Hotel Oakland, that are cornerstones. These are really important places, not only for folks to live or come learn, but we're emotionally and spiritually invested in these places. And things like the Alice Street mural, right? The process of generating this beautiful piece of artwork was it in. So I want to start with Spencer. Spencer, you were the filmmaker of Alice Street, and you engaged in a process to obviously do this. The mural, is a document of history in a way, right? Desi and Pancho and the company, was very intentional about generating imagery that would represent the history of the community. But what you made is also a historical document. It's a document of how this piece of infrastructure came together. So I was just wondering if you could start by telling us what motivated you to make this film. You probably weren't, you weren't aware at the time, I guess, that it would be obscured. So that's lent extra significance and depth to the film now as a document after the development was built.
Well, thank you again to San Francisco SF Urban Film Festival for having us, for having the film, for having this, really beautiful event. Yeah, thanks for the introduction too, from you, Robin, about this story. And in terms of, what pulled me into it, it was kind of a very organic process for me because I was actually living on Alice Street when I heard that the muralists were going to be starting a project literally, blocks from where I was living. So we got connected, myself and Pancho and Desi, as they were kind of formulating their ideas around what this mural could be. And so in terms of what inspired me to be engaged was really the proximity to, the area that they were going to paint, along with such incredible, as you mentioned, the spiritual infrastructure of the Malanga Pescador Center for the Arts, being such an important cultural center to Oakland. And, I could hear the drumming from the center in my apartment, right down the street. So I knew very much about, that center. And through the course of working on the documentary, learned a lot about Hotel Oakland across the street and the kind of gateway to Oakland Chinatown that center represents. So it was a journey, following Pancho and Desi as they were coming up with the design for the mural, which was very fascinating to me, and their engagement with the community. And then, walking down the street as they were painting pretty much every day. I'd be hanging out and just kind of documenting as people would pass by and have reactions to the transformation of those walls. And, it ended up being a real long process because of the negotiations with the developers, the deep community process that they were involved in to get the story right in terms of what was presented on the walls. And, and then, and the story just kind of kept evolving with the evolution and changes that were happening in downtown Oakland. And so we realized it was a much kind of bigger story than just the focus on this mural. It was about, the changes in gentrification, the impacts of gentrification on the arts community in Oakland. So the lens kind of widened to follow other stories that were in relationship to the theme of the mural.
Yeah, that makes me think about, the process that Desi and Pancho went through as the mural creators, along with others, of course, in reaching out to the community. And I was really struck with how intentional and respectful the process was that you all went through in order to, come up with ideas, to check that the representations and the choices you were making about representation really resonated with the community and accorded with, what they wanted to celebrate and present about their identity. And so, I'll put this out to Desi, and then I would love for Pancho to opine as well. But, through this project and through other projects that you run through your program, you've developed a whole methodology for approaching and engaging a community. You guys are very intentional about like not just dropping in to a neighborhood and doing some work, but it's a whole, in a way, maybe reversal from some of the ways that maybe you guys, when you were younger, had been approaching this practice of art. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the process, how it's, for Alice Street, and how that's informed your general process and approach as a community-based artist, artist.
I mean, yeah, like it was much more in depth than we had ever done. And I think that was in respect to the fact that there was this existing spiritual infrastructure that we recognized. You don't just walk into a space that has like a strong spiritual resonance and start messing around because you don't even understand all of the forces that are at work. And so it was both our responsibility, but also just like the most intelligent thing that we could do to actually get to know a little bit about what was at play in that space in order to interact with it. And I think that that's something that we've grown into as artists over time, coming from a place where we didn't ask anybody for permission. In some circumstances, you still don't. You still want to create something for the people that are going to see it. That's going to become like a space that people gather, that people talk about, that people utilize for their own community building. And I was thinking about it in relationship. I was just driving down the street a few days ago, and some of the new condos that they're building, they have to have these public art installations as part of their process. And some of them are kind of interesting and kind of cutting edge in terms of the way that they're built and constructed. They have lights and they have cool metal fabrication and stuff like that, but they don't connect to anything that was existing. And they're very much very cleaned, sanitized, so that there's nothing really there. And it's like people can continue to create this art, but it's like the sanitization of the community that comes with gentrification, where it's just sort of like, when you sanitize, you're also removing all of the good microbes and stuff like that, when you're killing the small insects that feed the birds and stuff. So there's that sanitization kills everything. And I think that we definitely, when we move through community, we want to help build and support and interact with the ecosystem that's already there, and now you have these pockets of Oakland that are dead zones for culture, for spirituality, because they've been sanitized the way that in the new developments that have been made. And I just sort of started meditating on that when you're talking about this. And it's, so I think our approach has been to just to be part of it, to not put ourselves above it or think that we know something that we don't, just to try to be humble. And that's, helped us produce something that we can feel proud of. And I think that moves us into the path of continuing that work and staying in this trajectory of engaging the community like that.
I just want to mention, I just want to add to what Desi say, is just like, for me, it was coming with the most high respect to a place, as Desi mentioned, where everything was happening for a long time. And so for me, it was just come with open ears and listen with the highest respect.
Yeah, that openness and genuine approach to listening really comes through in what's documented in the film, which is really only a slice of what you guys went through in order to do that. Pancho, I guess since we're still with you, you have a really interesting approach to the work too, in terms of your background being an educator, teaching art. And then also, that this work is very explicitly kind of political and social kind of artwork. and but that's not necessarily, I think, where as an artist you had started from, right? And so there's an interesting personal journey there, I think, around connecting to spiritual infrastructure. You're from Chile. You traveled to Brazil in the 80s and had an experience and a kind of epiphany around specifically murals and kind of being activated politically and now spiritually. So I was wondering if you could talk us through that that realization or that experience and how it influences how you show up today as an artist in community.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Basically, I grew up in the 80s in Chile, where we were in a dictatorship, and art was pretty much culture, and art was banned. So that spiritual infrastructure, it was gone basically, and it was all hidden and underground. So growing up, I always recall like everything was like black and white, basically. Like I didn't see a lot of murals. Everything that I saw in the walls was political messages, and until in 1990, I go to Brazil and I see all the art that was happening there, the graffiti about all, and blew my mind out. And sorry, I have a little doggy problem. And it was a beautiful experience, just being able to be there. Sorry, but when I came here to the States, opened a whole new door. I was able to actually reconnect to the streets, just by being a studio painter for like at least a decade or even longer. I did a lot of printmaking. I had a community, but I was pretty much isolated. And what community muralism and graffiti and street art brought me, it was like back to life, basically, to feel part of something. And that it's like it changed my whole perspective of who we should deliver the art, the themes, and the importance of like the thematic or what you are actually living in the street. So it also comes with a responsibility. And yeah, that's pretty much a little bit of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whatever practice we have or artistic or cultural practice we might connect to, it grows with us and informs how we develop as people. And this is probably the closest thing, helping to organize this festival, the closest that I come to artists, and certainly the process of bringing people together around film discussions like this. Have become a huge part of who I am. And so it's beautiful to hear how those experiences impact how you show up and how you see yourself contributing, to the world as an artist. You said something about the composition of the mural, and actually maybe want to address this question to Destiny. So you're a musician, your medium is music and sound. And Desi and Pancho's, medium is visual. And there are all kinds of other artists in this particular part of Oakland who have this deep, long, seated connection, both individual artists and groups, like all those who, practice out of the Malanga Center and teach out of the Malanga Center. So they're visual artists, dancers, musicians. They all participate in building the infrastructure around this place. At one point, you called what was depicted in the mural a modern day hieroglyphic, because what it did was compress kind of time and histories and communities and depicted how they were united. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about what you mean by the mural project uniting people, and your work as an artist in Oakland, how you see that fitting into this spiritual practice of bringing people together.
Wow, thank you so much for that question, and for all of you who invited me to be a part of this beautiful experience telling the story. One of the things that's very important is to be able to tell the story and the overlapping of the story of the communities that are here. Right there in the corner, what I call corner 14, is we have this beautiful movement of the Chinese Asian community with the African from the diaspora and from the immediate here. And each one of those walls, in my mind and in my heart, I see ancient Kemet, where the pharaohs and the families would either write the history of the past of the ancestors that they were standing on their shoulders, and that of what they wanted the children to move into. Literally, for me, this is what Desi and Pancho put together, was a modern day hieroglyphic that captured the spirit of the past, the Aloni and the Chichenyo, all of that, all of these wonderful ancestors that we are standing, not necessarily, at least not for me, on the shoulders. I am standing on their feet. Like when children are small, you stand on the feet of the parents because you want to feel that closeness. I'm not trying to have my head up too high. I need to feel the closeness of the ancestors guiding me, and specifically through this time that we're going through here. So as an artist, I am calling on or conjuring up the spirit of the ancestors to produce a sound that is representative of what's happening now. How it reflects, how it calls the past to speak to the present and to produce a future that's going to be successfully harmonious for all of us. The Malunga Cascalor Center for the Arts, previously in its previous entity known as the Alice Art Center, as I believe it was Moshe in the film who I met when I first came here to this beautiful building. He says, I have never seen anything like this throughout ever. And he's traveled all over the world. When I came here, I have yet to see anything like it as well. It is pulsating with ancestor memory and artistry. And anyone who comes in who can't feel it is really on some level dead or pretending that they don't want to come in touch with it. But when you come here, my mother, who's been an ancestor for over 20 years, she came up from Los Angeles and she said, whoa, what is this? And those were her words. What is this? She said, I've never felt anything like this. I said, Mommy, and I think I was probably about 40 then. I said, Mommy, I don't even know how to explain it, but you can feel it, can't you? She said, yes. It is a pulsating artistry that has not fully been acknowledged by the city of Oakland. Only when it's cute or it becomes, as it was said in a film by a current incumbent, it's the secret sauce. Respectfully, it's the secret sauce. No! Acknowledge the fact that this is an artistic, a pulsating center of cultural energy that is overlapping and intertwining and intermeshing with the inhabitants of the Chinese community and the Asian community, all work together as one. And that mural is a beautiful representation of it. As I shared with you previously, the building that got placed up, I think that it might have even felt for the developers on some level like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, because we gonna get close, we're not gonna get too close because we don't want to get burned. And so there is probably about a half an inch between the mural and the brand new edifice that's up right now. And if you're walking down towards City Hall, they knew to leave a little bit. There's a hand sticking out on the side of the wall that's saying, we ain't leaving. We ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere. I want to say one other thing too, because you touched on something, I believe it was Desi, because one of the things that also has happened is not respecting what was here first. And Desi made it a point to say, let me respect and acknowledge and honor what was here first before I touch anything. for those of you from Los Angeles, when the 105 freeway was being put in LA near the 91, I don't know whose idea it was, but the city itself called on the indigenous folks from that area because that freeway was going to go over an old burial ground from the indigenous people there. They called the children of those folks to come and to do a ceremony to bless that freeway so that we didn't have any problems. I'm just saying. Come on and acknowledge. If you want to have the blessings of the ancestors, come and acknowledge what's been here first and immerse yourself in that, because the new can coincide with the old. As a matter of fact, the new will have more success if it acknowledges its parents prior, and the success will come. All right, because you know I can go.
Thank you, Destiny. That's so much of what you said, resonates so deeply with me. This, the idea that the mural points to the past, but also points to the future and images what, we want our children to step into. So it's not just something that's retrospective, but also signals, what a potential future looks like where we are integrated and not acknowledging all of our histories. So yeah, it's a piece of connective tissue, not only in space, but over time. I didn't realize that that's one thing that the Egyptians were up to when they were, inscribing their tombs and they're creating their funerary art, but that makes a lot of sense. And so another thing about the Alice Street project as a mural and in the film, which I do want to loop back to Spencer to talk to about the impact that the film is having unto itself and a kind of program of education that's built around the film. But I want to turn to Lailan because we get a sense of this in the film, that the process of creating the mural generated a kind of connectivity locally that perhaps hadn't existed before, while communities may have existed alongside one another. That there was perhaps a deeper measure in imaging, layering all of the ancestral folks and new immigrants and everyone together. It kind of caused something deeper to happen socially around the neighborhood. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that from the spiritual side, and then also from the public policy side. Community benefits agreements are something that there was a community benefit agreement that came from the development at this site, and it wasn't the first, and it wasn't the last, right? There has been a way in which community benefit agreements are a standard way of community interacting and setting expectations for developers coming into the neighborhood. So yeah, what's your perspective on how the mural led up to some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the mural in itself really came at an important time in Oakland's, historical timeline, a time of great gentrification, displacement, kind of this threat that the foreclosure crisis, created, that the displacement crisis was beginning to create at that time, in terms of folks getting pushed out. And it kind of was like the ancestors kind of bubbled up. The energy was manifested on this wall and kind of spoke through, I think, our artists to name the histories and the connected histories that have existed in that neighborhood and in Oakland for many years. My family came in 1906 to Oakland Chinatown, across from San Francisco Chinatown. We had come during the gold rush. So there's a lot of family history that I began to explore as I was doing this organizing and really connecting with, and definitely connecting to the ferocity of my ancestors as we organized to defend our neighborhood. And so the mural was kind of a rallying point. It both documented the history and then also kind of prefigured the unity and the coalition that was created around the organizing around this mural and around this development, and four developments in this neighborhood that happened, and then other projects as well around the whole city. So I think this film kind of comes at a really important time when there's another wave of kind of Black Asian tensions, and so it's kind of a great time to lift up our connected histories, the ways in which both of our neighborhoods, Chinatown, West Oakland, the Black Arts District, have been displaced by the construction of the 880 highway through Oakland, the ways that our labor as communities were brought to build the ships for World War II, brought to build the railroads. There's so many kind of connections that exist, and at the same time, a lot of healing that needs to be done between the different, tensions that exist in our community, anti-Black racism in the Asian American community, some of the violent incidents that we've been seeing on the news, targeting our Chinatown elders. There's so much kind of energetically that is happening, and that it is being impacted by the development that's happening downtown and in downtowns across the country and the world. But it did definitely kind of forge and bring together folks in a moment where, Oaklanders were kind of beginning to acknowledge each other that, oh, I can tell that this person's from Oakland and this person's not from Oakland because of the spiritual kind of energy that people were bringing as we walk down the street and say hello to each other, right? But yeah, there was some really exciting kind of coalitions that were created through this work. We began to actually work, and you don't see it in the film, but we began to work with the labor unions who were working on these buildings and actually building the buildings, right? You have the electricians, you have the pipe fitters, right? The actual working class folks who literally build these buildings, uniting together with the Black and Asian communities to fight for these community benefits agreements, right? And they actually funded the appeals that we filed on, 2 or 3 of these projects to get, up to $20 million in community benefits agreements. Some of the aftermath is that, Demise Myers, who was one of the planning commissioners in the film, ended up kind of becoming the chair of the planning commission. And so we kind of took over the planning commission in a sense of really fighting for more progressive policies and to kind of stop the status quo of rubber stamping these developments without having communities at the table to have a say in what they looked like, right? And then, there was a development around the Kaiser Convention Center auditorium. And so there was a continued kind of coalition that was able to win a community benefits agreement on Orton development by the lake. Our coalition continued through the A's Stadium that's being proposed for downtown Oakland near Jack London Square. We kind of set the bar for community benefits agreement for that negotiation, where they kind of come in and say, okay, we know we're going to work with the community. As before they disrespected us and said we don't need to work with the community. So there's been a lot of collaboration around the downtown equity plan for Oakland, in positive developments like a new museum of jazz that we're working together on right now. And we kind of forged a community coalition for equitable development that chose to create an anti-displacement fund, about $500,000 that would fund organizing in these neighborhoods for these 2 different neighborhoods. And that was a strategic move to kind of address divisions that were happening in the community, because often on community benefits agreements with developments like this, you can sometimes have community members come in and kind of sell each other out and say, oh, we're going to, make an agreement on the side. And then, it kind of undermines what the other folks are going to ask for. But we decided to unify in solidarity instead and say, no, we want you to put this money into a fund that the community is going to get to decide how to use these funds to best support anti-displacement efforts. So there's a lot of work, like you mentioned, with the curriculum happening in schools. Spencer and I are working together to get the film and curriculum into our high schools, into our middle schools, to get students learning about kind of these Afro-Asian connections, the historical piece of it, and really, implementing ethnic studies and transforming our curriculum so that our students learn about this, and not just on a mural, but actually in our classrooms as well. So there's a lot of really exciting collaborations that have kind of come out of this one mural.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, community benefit agreements, that there have been collectively in this area, up to $20 million through, a succession of agreements is a huge, that's fantastic. That's amazing. And I think what's wonderful is that it points to becoming more of a standard method of engagement and not just something that the community kind of is responsible for leading ad hoc, but, it started to shift the culture within government, the kind of process of entitlement, setting the expectation that this is part of what needs to happen. And yeah, I do want to get back to Spencer about the curriculum, but maybe before we do that, can you help our audience maybe understand, Lailan, specifically when a community benefit agreement is made with a developer who wants to build, high-rise housing or what have you? You mentioned there's an anti-displacement fund and then the jazz center that are being explored, but what are other concrete ways that the funds garnered from these community benefit agreements are then kind of dispersed and reinvested back into those who are already present in the community?
Yeah, this project was the first one, so we didn't really know exactly what to ask for. But we did engagements with the Malanga folks and just with our different coalitions and kind of asked, what would it mean for us to be part of this development, to be at the table and helping to shape what our neighborhoods look like. So we have an art advisory board that we put onto every project CBA, where we make sure that there are local representatives from the neighborhood and from local arts organizations to be able to shape what the use of the public art funds are, which is a measure we have here in Oakland where 1%, has to go to public art around the building. So we wanted to make sure that public art was, folks from the Malanga, folks from our Oakland Asian Cultural Center, who could, really do that placekeeping and really identify these buildings as part of our neighborhoods. We also fought for a retail advisory board so that we could have a say in what kind of retail goes into the bottom of these buildings, right? Because the planning department, requires that there be retail at the bottom of most of these buildings, but we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just, Walmart and, big boxes that came in, right? That it's actual local businesses that were able to afford it. So we negotiated affordable retail rates, for up to 10 years, for example, at, a certain rate for each of these CBAs. We kind of negotiated with the developers what we thought was reasonable and what we thought our small businesses could afford to be able to be in these new buildings, right? We fought for affordable housing on some of them developers refused to put in affordable housing because, we have Costa-Hawkins as a big barrier to being able to just necessitate that every new building have, 15, 20% of affordable units. So we really had to push and fight. Some of them contributed to affordable housing projects in the neighborhood, and then some of them we were able to get them to sell a piece of their project to an affordable housing developer to build, 60 units of affordable housing for families and seniors in the neighborhood. In one of the big projects, they agreed to put in, 5-10% affordable units in their market rate development. So, we had different kind of agreements that we came to, but it's not enough, it's not enough, and it's not enough to meet our affordable housing goals. And then the anti-displacement fund and making sure we had resources for organizations to be able to do tenant organizing, to be able to, do that placekeeping work and that anti-displacement work as well. There's a lot of different things that we put in that kind of came up from the community.
Yeah, and I love that you reference the term placekeeping. This is something that I've talked at length about and been inspired by Roberto Bedoya at the Oakland Cultural Affairs Division. There's this old world word, placemaking, which some have criticized as being a kind of chauvinist concept, but there are complements to that or other ways of looking at it, placekeeping, as well as place knowing, and all of these things come together to render a sense of place belonging, which I think is what happened at the Alice Street mural. It was like, some artists were there to facilitate a kind of making project, but that relied on, the sense of knowing from ancestors and longtime residents and others who are, kind of resident and acting in that sphere. As well as knowing. So that all came together to amplify this sense of belonging. I really like that framework. and not just looking through things through a kind of placemaking lens, and using that language exclusively. So, but maybe just to turn back to Spencer. So, the film is an incredible piece of art unto itself, capturing the nuances of the process and, revealing all of the considerations that went into making the mural, the kind of social and political and economic dimensions swirling around this. And now it's one of the, I guess, living and breathing documents of what was there in terms of the mural and its story, that can't really be seen anymore. And it's gone on it has even, a really active life beyond the mural itself. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the kind of social impact work that the film is kind of helping to propel forward. Lailan, referred to this in the curriculum that you guys are designing. And did you have ambitions about this film taking on this whole other kind of public impact and educational piece to it? Because it's certainly a unique kind of component to a documentary film project.
Thank you. No, I didn't know at all that the film would have the ability to have impact in the way that it has already, and we plan to continue that process. But just like this discussion, right? It's by creating a platform, having us telling stories, kind of brings to the surface these topics that then can be discussed and talked about in a different way. I think by just continuing to tell the story, and I think as Destiny brought up, these are long time stories. There's a lot of history involved that kind of germinates the soil for what action can come out of this storytelling, in that sense of a spiritual infrastructure, by kind of creating the structure around a mural. It becomes a place where people talk about these topics and learn about the history. And I hope the film can also kind of be that, a place in which a table where people can gather, and to come up with ideas and share strategies in their particular communities. Because in a sense, in what we're learning, the film's now shown in almost 20 film festivals and has a lot of opportunities for other screenings. And we have an impact campaign we're planning through California, that, every community kind of has its own story that, has points of relation to this one. And in a sense has their own Alice Street, whatever the name of that particular intersection is in each community. There's a lot of commonalities. And we showed the film in Calgary for a planning, a conference of urban planners in Calgary, in Canada, which is a very kind of, odd spot for this story, very local Oakland story to have made it to this group of people. But to hear the kind of conversation that came out of them watching, it's like 80 or 90 urban planners in Calgary watched the film and then had discussion about how do we center culture in our planning of our city? How do we pull, diverse communities to the table to talk about, where new buildings go and what those buildings need to house? So I think it's powerful to think about how, a story can have impact, and by kind of continuing to tell those stories. And yeah, we're really excited that to partner with Oakland teacher, longtime Oakland teacher, to develop a really beautiful curriculum around the film. And it will be introduced to Oakland high schools, but beyond, we really hope to kind of share the film with schools around the country. We signed with a educational distributor called Video Project out of Los Angeles to help us with that mission. And like I mentioned, we have an impact campaign that's supported by the California Arts Council and the San Francisco Foundation that will be kicking off in May to continue doing impact screenings throughout the state. And we'll see where it goes, but it's to hear, all of these individuals talk about, you know, how this story has impacted them, their continuing work. I just hope it can kind of keep being the space in which these kinds of discussions can happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's such a provocative piece of work. You know, it really does make you think and reflect on the neighborhood that you live in, where you came from. There are self-reflections that it provokes no matter where you are, whether you're in Oakland or elsewhere. And so it's really powerful to hear how you guys are working on getting young people in schools exposed to the film, but also that, you know, there's some structured discussion around it. That's really beautiful. Well, I think we have some questions coming in from the audience who's tuning in. So as a reminder, everyone, if you're tuning in, please, you know, if you want to ask questions about the film, about, you know, what we saw, go ahead and do that in the comment box below your view screen if you're tuning in on our website, SF Urban Film Fest, or if you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the comments function too to address questions in the chat. So we have a couple questions that are kind of related, so I'm going to kind of put them together, and anyone on the panel, please feel free to jump in on this one. What are the ways that we can protect our spiritual and creative spaces in a continuously gentrifying area? How can we prevent the sanitization of our neighborhoods that comes through gentrification?
Yeah, I can speak to some of the policy work that we've been advocating for and also learning about from other cities. Yeah, definitely in terms of thinking about how we protect our cultural districts. This has been a conversation we've been having across, you know, Fruitvale and the Black Arts District and the Black Cultural Zone and Chinatown and all these different really vibrant neighborhoods that, you know, someone made a comment is why people want to come to Oakland. We actually need to have policies that protect them through zoning and through planning policies and decisions and rules, right? So for example, in San Francisco, Chinatown, they actually do have some protective zoning measures that say that any retail that goes into San Francisco Chinatown has to be neighborhood serving retail. And so, you know, that's been a kind of saving grace for Chinatown in San Francisco, where, you know, biggest tech boom, huge financial institutions right next to San Francisco Chinatown is one of the reasons why it hasn't been swallowed up by downtown, frankly. So we have to be bold. That was a policy that got put into place in the 1970s. You know, we really need to be bold like they were in the 70s and be willing to do those kinds of things in a moment of intense, you know, capitalism and development. We need to be able to say, you know, this is what we need for our neighborhoods. You know, for so many years, Oakland was starved for development. And so they just kind of let anybody come in and do whatever they want. But as I've traveled around the country and learned about equitable development policies across the country, you see that there are cities like Philadelphia that have a really exciting model where neighborhoods actually have a say. It's in the infrastructure of the planning and zoning departments where neighborhoods have a say in their development. They have registered community organizations who get to review big projects and they're required to do community outreach to let neighbors know what's going in their neighborhoods. And to be able to have a say and to be able to make requests of developers and make sure that it's safe for the neighborhood and contributes to the neighborhood. They have people, you know, who actually coordinate neighborhood engagement in planning. You know, the Twin Cities also have really great policies. In Seattle, they also have equitable policies like an equitable development scorecard where, you know, when a development is filling out an application, you know, for a development, they actually have to say this is how we're meeting different equity measures. You know, that's something very simple that can be done in an application, but we haven't had the political will or leadership to get that done. We've shared these ideas with different city officials and, you know, people just haven't moved it forward. So there's a lot of things that can be done to really protect cultural districts and to prevent displacement and make sure that communities are at the table in these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, it seems like affecting that structural change, which sometimes can be more immediate, but also a kind of long game, is really important. That these kind of institutions of government and our governance kind of processes yeah, that it is formalized, that there are advisory panels on, either, artwork or, equity and stabilization, that becomes an explicit part of what you pursue when you're seeking approval from a local government, to enter a neighborhood. So as a planner, that really resonates with me.
And I just need to say that, the voters voted down Prop 21, which would have allowed us to have inclusionary housing in Oakland. I think San Francisco has a policy, but we didn't get a policy passed because developers bought off council members in the 90s. But if we were able to pass, that rent control law, we were able to say, yeah, every new development just has to have 20% affordable housing. So we need to, as California voters, get that passed soon.
Yeah. Another question was reflecting on the fact that the mural is no longer able to be seen. So maybe for Desi, where else can folks go, either in the immediate vicinity or elsewhere in Oakland, to see the work of you and your organization? I know, there's the Greenlining Institute has a mural that you all worked on, which was recent, where we were hoping to have this panel actually, but that COVID kind of foiled our plans. But where else can folks witness the work that you and your organization do?
Well, I want to say that the mural on the Greenlining Institute, Sundance, was the mural that we created with the funds that we won from the developer from that struggle. And it was a piece that I designed, but we created with I was the only male, and it was pretty much all women of color who were actually the real leaders of the project. They were teaching me. We were using tools that I wasn't as familiar with, so they really led the way in terms of developing and painting that piece. And I'm about to start another mural in Berkeley Friday. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's a block long, and it's going to be hopefully, following in the same vein. We've done a similar process, but not nearly to the level of depth, and it's always challenging. This is Alice Street was one of the projects where we really got the capacity and the space to do that in-depth, engagement that's really required. And so part of, like, within the artist standpoint, it's like making your projects large enough to allow you to do that. And that requires support from the people who are commissioning it, from the cities, from however we do it, to allow us to do interviews, to do research, and to support us like that. And, we also, like, I was thinking about what Lailan was talking about. We also just need to be that people who have practice culture need to be able to practice their culture within these communities. And so there's literally, like, laws that could protect cultural institutions, protect cultural practices that can be localized. Within the space around the Malanga, you have to allow drumming because it's the Malanga. So just get over it. And we've seen these issues happen in other communities where people have been shut down from their practices because some new neighbor moves in and starts complaining. So I got a little off track about what we do, but I think it's just an important point that we have to, like, there's the policy around keeping people in the community, and then there's also the policy around keeping the community's practices and culture alive. So I just wanted to say that much. You can always visit our website and all that good stuff, CRP Bay Area, to see more work that we're doing. And we have a whole spell out of the best practices for engagement. But really, I think that we should just engage with our communities and continue to fight these fights that we need to keep Oakland really Oakland. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Yeah. And thank you for referencing that you have that resource on your website, how to do community engagement as an artist working in the public realm. So there's so much more that I feel like we could talk about and get into. Thank you. I just want to thank Destiny, Spencer, Lailan, Desi, and Pancho for spending time with us this evening and sharing your thoughts and your hearts with everyone who's tuned in. We at the festival are very grateful for that. So thank you. I think I'll bring us to a close. Also just want to acknowledge our production tech manager, Omid Manocheri, who's also a curator and producer for the film festival. So he wears many hats. Omid, I apologize for not acknowledging you at the top of the program with the rest of our crew. Thank you for all your work. So with that, I just want to let everybody know about tomorrow's film festival programs. Tomorrow at noon, Thursday, the 18th of February, we have a program titled A Pandemic of Opportunity, What and How to Change the Public Realm, looking at the ways that cities around the world have been responding innovatively to the global pandemic. And for that, we'll be joined by Professor Jung-In Kim with Sungsil University in Seoul, Korea, Dr. Juliette Kane with the Project for Public Spaces in New York City, the director of events there, and Vivian Dupa, who is with Stipo, Netherlands, but based in Thessaloniki and Athens. So we'll be talking about pandemic response to streets. And then tomorrow evening at 5:30, we have a program titled Exploring the Urban American Indian Experience in Yelamu. We'll be joined by the American Indian Cultural District, who, as I said earlier in the program, gifted us the land acknowledgement that we do at the start of every program, and have been amazing teachers and consultants with us, helping us understand how to show up around land acknowledgement. So that will include a panel with filmmaker Peter Bratt and folks from the Cultural District, Greg Castro, April McGill, Mary Travis Allen. The panel will be moderated by Shariah Souza, who's the Executive Director of the American Indian Cultural District. Excuse me. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. That should be flashing up on screen. We will also email everyone who tuned in tonight with that. We want to know what you thought of tonight's program, how we can make things better. If you have any ideas about future programming you'd like the film festival to investigate, please join us in thinking through some curatorial potential for that. And so with that, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who tuned in, to everyone on the panel who joined us and shared their insights. From the SF Film Festival family, have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow at noon.